Assalamu Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I would like to welcome all of you to this special Friday night lecture. The title of tonight's lecture is going to be a panel discussion on the COVID-19 vaccine. The objective of tonight's lecture and panel discussion is, in a sense, to try to create some understanding for all of you, our IAGD community members, a little bit more about the fundamentals of the COVID-19 vaccine. Of course, it's something that's relatively new for all of us, and we're still learning about it. There's no news coming out on a regular basis regarding the vaccine. And we want to just create some understanding, some clarity to some questions, some apprehensions that community members may have, something they may have heard on TV, or they may have read something or spoke to somebody about the vaccine. So we want to try to clarify any of those doubts there may be regarding the vaccine. And of course, bring some confidence. Bring some confidence in going out there and getting this vaccine, because it's so imperative and so important for all of us to do this, to try to bring an end to this terrible pandemic. To help us achieve all these things, we have with us this evening two healthcare experts. I would like to introduce them both to you this evening. The first physician I'd like to introduce to you is Dr. Tayeb Jukaku. Dr. Jukaku, of course, is very well known to many of us here in Southeast Michigan community. Very well-known physician. Dr. Jukaku is board certified in internal medicine, as well as board certified in nephrology. Dr. Jukaku did his residency in internal medicine from Beaumont Hospital, and then went on to do his fellowship in nephrology from Henry Ford. Dr. Jukaku has multiple different professional affiliations, including the International Society of Nephrology, the American Society for Transplant Physicians, as well as the American Society of Nephrology. We're very pleased to have Dr. Jukaku here with us this evening. And at a more community level, as many of you know, Dr. Jukaku has also served as a former president here at the organization. So Dr. Jukaku, thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you for inviting me.
The second physician I would like to introduce is Dr. Farhan Bhatti. Dr. Farhan is a board certified family physician. He completed his residency training in family medicine at Sparrow Hospital. Prior to that, he graduated from the College of Human Medicine at Michigan State University. Dr. Bhatti also holds 2 undergraduate degrees with honors from Michigan State University, political science and physiology, and he also has a specialization in bioethics, humanities, and society. He is a clinical assistant professor of family medicine, as well as the CEO of Carefree Medical, which is a nonprofit health clinic that's located in Lansing that helps provide healthcare to people of low-income families. So, Dr. Bhatti, thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for being with us this evening.
Assalamu Alaikum. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I'd like to go ahead and go right into it. The first point I'd like to raise is to Dr. Jukaku. Dr. Jukaku, why is it so important for us all to strongly consider getting this vaccine? Of course, we all know that it's been a devastating pandemic, and now we're getting all this information about how imperative and important it is to get this vaccine. Can you just speak to us a little about what each individual that doesn't have a background that can really defer to you as a healthcare professional to give him some good, solid advice as to why it is so imperative and so important for all of us to really strongly consider taking this vaccine?
Sure. Thank you very much, Dr. Junaed. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulil Kareem. Let me just start off with a broader perspective of why we are here, which is to allay any fears in the community and to address some of the suspicions and concerns that community members might have. Alhamdulillah, we as Muslims believe in science from day one. The first word of the Quran was Iqra, and possibly the second word was Al-Qalam. There are hadiths, and I don't want to get into the religious aspect of this. I think Mufti Rabbani is on the panel, probably are going to address us. But suffice it to say that there's a hadith that says that for every illness that Allah has created, there's a cure. And there's further hadith which is specifically pertaining to this, which says that In a pandemic, don't get into the area where there is a pandemic or a plague. And if you're there, try to not infect others or get out of there. So, alhamdulillah, religion is based on facts and reason combined with spirituality. Now, coming back to this pandemic, this is a great um, uh, affliction and a test for us. To date, 116 million people have been infected. About 2.5 million people have died all over the world. Not only is it immediate illness and death, and you escape it, there may be long-term effects which are devastating on a community level. Just coming to my own personal story, my brother just died last week with COVID in LA. He was a healthy 80-year-old, walking, functioning. He used to head a large organization back at home. Just died last Sunday. I just came from LA today. My nephew in India was on the vent, who was a 40-year-old healthy person with mild diabetes. For 2.5 weeks, he's still on a full oxygen support off of the ventilator. So long-term effects, immediate effects, death, medical cost, or the ramification of this pandemic. So one should look at the big picture. Okay. Personally, we have to be responsible for our own family. I, as a physician, or anybody of you, I expose my people at home to the risk of getting the disease and having devastating consequences, not just a little bit, right? So, don't I have a responsibility for myself, my health, which Allah has given me and has asked me to take care of my body? Okay, this is from Hadith. And secondly, don't I have a responsibility for my immediate family that I don't put them into trouble? Thirdly, don't I have responsibility for the community at large, in the masjid, in your workplace, or in your city and in your country, and in the world when you travel? And so, taking care of yourself, not contracting the disease, and if a vaccine is possible, you need to take it because of your responsibility to each of those levels we talked about. By taking a vaccine, not only you protect yourself and from the consequences that you might have on your family through medical cost, death and suffering and sadness and all these problems that I am currently undergoing right now as we speak. Okay, and you have a responsibility to improving what's called herd immunity. If people on listening to me don't understand what it is basically if the 70 to 80% of the population has immunity against the disease, you will be less likely to spread it. So then everybody's chance of getting the disease, even if it's present in the 10 to 20% of the population, goes down. So it's imperative that we, first of all, take precaution not to contract the disease. Number two, take the vaccine when it's available. So you have a responsibility at multiple levels. I hope I conveyed that clear and unambiguously. Thank you, Junaed.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you, Dr. Jukaku. I don't think you could have spelled it out any more clearly, and we want to pass along our condolences to you on the passing of your brother. I did not know that. Inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi rajiun. May Allah grant your brother the highest play of Jannatul Firdaus. I mean, moving along to Dr. Bhatti, I wanted to kind of touch base with you, Dr. Bhatti, a little bit about, the other, now that we've kind of crossed the idea of why there's a significant relevance of getting the vaccine. The next step then in that process then is you hear about Pfizer, you hear about Moderna, now you hear about Johnson and Johnson now recently getting FDA approval, emergency use authorization for their vaccine. You hear about maybe getting 2 shots for 2 of the vaccines, and now 1 shot for the Johnson and Johnson. So can you talk a little about the differences between these vaccines? What are the differences? Are there differences in the efficacy with any one vaccine versus the other? So we have a little bit more understanding about the different options that are out there.
Absolutely. So, Assalamu Alaikum, everyone. So I'm going to first talk about how the vaccines work, and then I will more directly answer the questions thereafter. So in the case of the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, these are mRNA vaccines. Now, right off the bat, people wonder, well, these vaccines were developed so quickly, just over 9 months. How can I trust this? And I would like to just right off the bat inform the public that mRNA vaccine technology has been in development for more than 2 decades. This technology has been thoroughly researched. And yes, it's true that these are the first mRNA vaccines to come to market, but this technology is tried and true. And the government has invested hundreds of millions of dollars in helping these vaccines develop. So how do they work? Pfizer and Moderna use something called mRNA. So on the surface of the actual virus, on the surface of the actual COVID-19, there's a protein. We'll call it surface protein. And this protein is what the vaccines target. So the vaccines, in the case of Pfizer and Moderna, what they do is they use the same process that the virus uses inside of our body to replicate. And what they do is they create that surface protein. So they cause our own bodies to create the surface protein that's found on the virus itself. And then our body creates antibodies against this surface protein that's found on the surface of the virus. So if in the future, if we're exposed to the real virus, our immune system will recognize that surface protein on the virus and then attack it and fight it off. This technology is very cutting edge. In the case of Johnson & Johnson, very similar mechanism. What they do is they code for that same surface protein using a deactivated adenovirus. Adenovirus is a type of common cold virus. And so this deactivated common cold virus is mixed with the DNA instructions to create this surface protein. So then that deactivated adenovirus is injected to us by way of the vaccine, and then our body replicates it, creates the surface protein, and then our immune system recognizes the surface protein and creates antibodies. The next thing I want to talk about is how effective are these vaccines? I'm sure everybody by now has heard of the 95% number. So what they say on TV is that these vaccines are 95% effective. And this is actually a quite misleading statistic, because when the public hears that a vaccine is 95% effective, what they think is that it's 5% ineffective. Well, actually, that's not true. In the clinical trials, over 40,000 people took part in the Pfizer and Moderna clinical trials. And in those trials, in the group of people who actually received the vaccine, only 0.04% of those people got sick with COVID. So it's actually 99.96 effective at preventing COVID. In the case of Johnson & Johnson, the only metric that matters is hospitalizations and death. And in the clinical trials with Johnson & Johnson, 100% of people who received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine were prevented from needing to be hospitalized and dying. None of the three vaccines were looking at preventing symptoms altogether. So a vaccinated person can still get some cold symptoms, some mild malaise or fatigue or chills, but that's not the point of the vaccine. The point of the vaccines altogether are to prevent hospitalizations and deaths, and all three of the vaccines are exceedingly effective in doing that.
If I could just follow up real briefly on that, Dr. Bhatti, I think it's also a point that has been raised on multiple occasions from patients and from the population at large is in the past with the flu vaccine, for example, a lot of people will say, well, I got the flu vaccine, but I still ended up getting the flu. But I think it's important to also explain to the audience, the whole idea of severity of illness. Is there data to suggest that by getting the COVID vaccine, because the thing that really makes this so different than other viruses is the fatality that's associated with the severity of illness with COVID-19. And so
Mhm.
by getting the vaccine, if one were to unfortunately acquire the virus, would by having the vaccine limit and lessen the burden of the severity of the illness?
Absolutely. In fact, that's what the Pfizer and Moderna clinical trials demonstrated, was that only 0.04% of people who received the vaccines in those trials got sick at all from COVID, number one. Number two, altogether, the vaccines are completely effective in preventing against long-term complications from COVID. So if you do happen to become exposed to COVID after receiving the vaccine, and you do get some mild cold symptoms, that's not going to have any lingering long-term harm the way that it obviously would if you aren't vaccinated. So that's the beauty of these vaccines, is that they have been demonstrated to be exceedingly effective in preventing any moderate to severe symptoms and all of the sequelae, or all the consequences that can happen, the lung damage, the kidney damage. You know, the COVID virus itself attacks certain cells in our lungs and kidneys in particular, but also in our brain and other organs. And by getting the vaccine, you can effectively prevent that end organ damage from taking place.
Okay. Um, Moving along then, I want to just now touch base on the other item that tends to come up quite a bit, which is apprehension about getting the vaccine because of the potential effects of the vaccine, whether it's the short-term side effects or versus the concerns about possible long-term side effects that could be related to the vaccine. So, Dr. Jukaku, can you just mention to our audience a little bit about, of course, with the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, it's two shots at either 21 or 28 days apart, ideally. What to kind of expect after the first shot, as well as what to potentially expect after the second shot, and how this is actually considered to be, even though they are side effects, kind of a normal immunogenic response of the body and something that you can actually expect to happen.
Sure. Yeah, it's a very, very valid question. Any injection you take might cause you some pain. So in the trials, the placebo, those who got placebo did have some local area pain where the site of injection, but the pain was a little bit more. In the vicinity of 60 to 70% of people will have pain even after the first shot. After the second shot, again, in the same 70 to 80% will have some pain. That's most of the symptoms. Usually after the second shot, you will have temperature, body aches for about 24 to 48 hours. Occasionally, it might last 3 to 4 days at the most. So the side effects are very confined, very tolerable compared to if you didn't take the vaccine and the consequences. So just weigh the options you have. You want to die or be on a ventilator in the ICU and then come out for 3 months in a rehab place and then you can't breathe, or you die from a heart attack. And my patients have died from a heart attack 3 months after the COVID. My partner, I don't want to take the names, a 45-year-old, healthy, 6.5-footer, strong guy, got bilateral pulmonary embolism 2 months after having a mildly symptomatic disease. So the side effects of the vaccines are nothing. The effectiveness, like Dr. Farhan Bhatti said, nearly 99 to 100% of patients, nobody died from the vaccine, not one single case of death, not one single case of any significant morbidity, that means needing hospitalization or something. The worst thing that was reported was 2 or 3 physicians actually in England, and a couple of them here in the United States with allergies had to be hospitalized for a few hours to make sure they're okay, and they walked home same evening. That's the worst thing that has been reported. There were a couple of cases of some neurological illness, both in the placebo arm and in the vaccine arm. I think it was in AstraZeneca, if I remember right, who was later, and for which the trial was stopped, dead center in the middle of the trial. And after they realized that and figured out, and after investigation, that it was unrelated to the vaccine, they had pre-existing condition that exposed them to those, and they recovered from that anyways. All of the 3 people that were involved, 1 in the placebo, 2 in the arm that got the vaccine. So the vaccine is extremely safe. Little bit of side effects, take it, no problem. And I want to make sure that and stress on what Dr. Bhatti said. Is not going to prevent you from having the infection in your throat, okay, and might have mild symptoms, but you'll be protected from the disease. So even when you get the vaccine, you may still carry it and transmit it, so you have to be careful. So I hope I answered that question.
And I just
Yeah,
want to
thank you very much for that
piggyback off,
clarification.
if I may, just piggyback off of that, because that was a great answer.
Go ahead.
Very important point. It's especially until we get to that herd immunity level, even after the public starts receiving the vaccine, it is super, super important that everybody continue to wear masks and socially distance themselves, because after you get your vaccine, if you're exposed to COVID, you can still breathe it in, and then you can still exhale and breathe it out and spread it to other people who haven't been vaccinated. So don't feel like you're off the hook after you get your vaccine. That's really, really important. And then just to finish up the point about the COVID shot and the flu shot, without fail, the most common reason that my patients tell me they don't want to get the flu shot every year is because they think they can get the actual flu from the flu shot, even though it's scientifically impossible to get the flu from the flu shot because it's not a live virus. Same thing with the COVID vaccine. It is scientifically impossible to get COVID-19 from any of the COVID-19 vaccines because, as I explained, all the vaccines are doing is creating a protein that's found on the surface of the real virus so that if you're exposed, your immune system can recognize that protein and then fight it off. So I hope people, after listening to this, they won't use that as an excuse of being afraid of actually getting COVID from the COVID vaccine.
Yeah, that's a great segue, Dr. Bhatti. My next question was really going to address that issue of, now that we've got to the point where we've crossed the bridge of getting the vaccine, discussing the different options, the side effects. Now, what comes after the vaccine? If I've gotten myself vaccinated, will I still have to wear a face mask? Will I still have to socially distance? And I think you've kind of hit those points already. I guess just to follow up on that just a little bit would be, what would you say to a question that could be directed to you in regards to, now we're hearing more and more about different variants of the COVID-19, whether it's the UK or the South African or the Brazilian variant. There's been a lot of discussion in clinicians' offices about now regarding, now that if we have variants, will these vaccines that we have available be effective against some of these variants? So how would you address that issue?
Great question. So the first thing that I'll do is explain what a variant is. So when a virus goes into our bodies, it replicates itself. It creates multiple copies, many, many copies. And then those multiple copies then infect our cells, and that's how we get sick. So when a virus is spreading from person to person to person and replicating inside of so many people, thousands and millions of people, that replication process itself can go awry. So even if one or two small proteins differ when the virus replicates itself inside of a person, you can have those differences in the replication create new variants. And this is a normal biological evolutionary thing that viruses do. This is not new or unusual. This is what happens with viruses when they're replicating on large scales, especially then they can have variants. And so what I like to say is if the virus can't mutate, the virus can't mutate if it can't replicate. So the key to getting us out of the pandemic is to make this virus stop replicating. In other words, make make enough people reach a level of immunity so that it's difficult for the virus to transfer from person to person and infect people and continue the replication process. So that's what the vaccine does over time, is it decreases replication of the virus. And there was a second half of that question that I missed. Dr. Huck, if you could refresh my memory.
That's pretty much what it was speaking to, was the different types of the variants that are out there, and
Oh,
whether or
yes.
not the vaccine itself will protect us against these variants.
So far, by the grace of God, alhamdulillah, the data that we have so far demonstrates that on each of these variants, nevertheless, that surface protein that all of the vaccines are targeting exists on all of those variants. And so we can expect that as long as that surface protein remains on subsequent variants, that our immune system will recognize that surface protein and attack whichever strain of the COVID-19 virus that we've been exposed to. So thank God for that, and inshallah that continues. The real problem might arise in the future if a strain pops up that doesn't have the surface protein that the vaccines are targeting. But thus far, the data that we have indicates that yes, that surface protein is consistent between all of the strains. Although some of the strains are more virulent, which means they can spread more easily from person to person, nevertheless, that surface protein is there.
I wanted to ask you, Dr. Jukaku, a little bit about regarding. We've already kind of hit on some of these issues regarding the hesitancies that pertain to the manufacturing of the virus, the vaccine, excuse me, at large, regarding, for example, stem cell technology and the ingredients of the vaccine, and kind of tying that in a little bit even from if you will a spiritual perspective, meaning people citing religious concerns regarding taking the vaccine. Have you had to deal with that with your patients, and how would you address that if that question came across you as a clinician?
Sure. I think it's an important part of this dialogue. In fact, it's amongst my relatives and amongst my educated relatives. Sorry to say that, but that's the fact. And you see that in the community also. So there are multiple levels of concern. Some of them are genuine. Some of them are really not very intelligent. I don't know what other words I can use for that response. Let's look at that from a holistic point of view. What are your concerns? Well, the one religious concern is, tawakkaltu ala Allah. That's not really any valid religious objection. Let's put that out. I don't think anybody will subscribe to that, and we should not, because that doesn't make any sense from any school of thought in Islam. That's just people saying stuff. The other religious concern is to do with how the vaccine is manufactured, and those are real concern. Then there is a scientific concern. Is it safe? This is new stuff. You guys got it within 2 or 3 months. And Farhan pointed to that part. Let me just take the part about how it is manufactured. The mRNA vaccine, which is the Pfizer and the Moderna, have no haram or halal any issues, period. Okay, you just take part of the virus, put it in there, make them grow, and then it's just a small part of the virus that you get back into your system, and the immune system will recognize it and kill it. And the process might get that fever and body aches because your immune response is just trying to kill that little flag of that virus that is circulating in your body. So the two viruses, the two vaccines have been cleared by internationally recognized, nationally recognized ulamas. all over the world. And I looked into this question when you asked me to talk about this, and make sure that no concern on Moderna and Pfizer. Now, coming to the AstraZeneca and Johnson and Johnson, it is true that some of the stem cells that were harvested from 1970s and 1980s aborted fetuses are used as factories to produce the part of the virus that we want to produce. So then they purify it, and then you get out the stem cells. They're not getting into your system, but they are in the manufacturing process. So some ulamas from America have said that, having that possibility of having a completely halal option, try to avoid that. Okay, and I would go along with that very clearly. But let's say if you didn't have those two, you had only this. Remember that same technology is used in a lot of other vaccines you've been taking all your life. Okay, so you already used it in other vaccines. Okay, other medications have pork products. There's no pork product in any of this stuff. Okay, so the only concern and valid concern, I would agree, is the use of stem cells from aborted fetuses, the cell lines that originated in 1975. So it's not the original cell itself. It is kind of copies of that. So, it's like, I don't want to get into there, and I'll let Mufti Rabbani speak about it. If you had a pig or something and died and it got converted into soil, and then, the plants use it, is that fruit coming out of that? I don't want to get into that. Let Dr. Mufti Rabbani answer that. But you have options that are clean, no questions. So take those. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's very well put, especially when you highlighted the point that a lot of these we've been using vaccines for a very long time. Even if you look at historically with smallpox and the MMR vaccine, etc. A lot of these things have been around for a very long time. I wanted to just transition now into another important aspect of it, which really is now that as we're Dr. Bhatti, as we're transitioning through the phased eligibility criteria of the vaccine. We just recently heard from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services that they're kind of moving up the expected date for people that are over the age of 50 to March 8th that have pre-existing medical conditions. Can you speak to a little bit about who all is going to now become eligible for the vaccine in the state of Michigan over the next couple of weeks and months? A lot of people are very eager to get this vaccine as Ramadan is also rapidly approaching. And if you could actually, I'll follow up with that when you're finished answering that first part of the question.
Sure. So up until now, the only people in Michigan that have been eligible to get the vaccine are people either who are 65 and up uniformly, or people who are between the ages of 60 and 65 who have pre-existing medical conditions such as diabetes, COPD, obesity, hypertension. The definition of chronic conditions is pretty liberal and open, but nevertheless, anybody with a chronic condition. And then starting Monday, this upcoming Monday, the state has upgraded the criteria because the supply of vaccines that are being distributed to the state of Michigan from the federal government is increasing. And so as that supply goes up, more people in the state will be able to get it. So in this initial increased supply over the next 2 weeks, people between the ages of 50 and 65, or actually anybody who's 50 and up, who has a chronic condition like, again, diabetes, hypertension, asthma, COPD, obesity, etc. Anybody 50 and up with any of those conditions can go and get any of the vaccines that are available to them from either a local pharmacy or their local hospital system or health department. And then starting March 22nd, the state has already announced that starting March 22nd in Michigan, everybody ages 50 and up with or without a pre-existing health condition will be able to get the vaccine. So that's the rollout as it happens, as it has happened in Michigan thus far. That's all that's been announced thus far. So if you're 50 and up, and alhamdulillah, you don't have any pre-existing health conditions, then your date right now is March 22nd to be able to start receiving the vaccine.
So are we still looking at probably sometime in the summer, Dr. Bhatti, in terms of the general population? For example, if you're 25, 30 years old with no underlying medical conditions, are we still looking at, if I remember correctly, I think somewhere around August was the expected date where the vaccine would become eligible for pretty much the general population? Or do you think that might be moved up a little bit as well with more availability with vaccines getting FDA approval?
So I think it will be moved up, of course, God willing. But the drug companies have really ramped up production. President Biden recently invoked the Emergency Defense Production Act, where another rival drug company to Johnson & Johnson, Merck, has actually been instructed to help Johnson & Johnson create more of its vaccine to increase the supply as quickly as possible. And so that action in and of itself has expedited the timeline, so that we think by April and May, we might be able to see younger individuals getting this vaccine. That is the hope, and that is the expectation from the government right now, is that they were saying maybe August, September, and now that has been moved up with some degree of optimism to April and May.
Yeah, that'll be fantastic. Dr. Jukaku, I wanted to pose a very important question to you regarding, again, patients with chronic underlying medical comorbidities, especially people, for example, with end-stage renal disease, or patients that are taking immunosuppressive therapy. Now, as you know, those patients were not included for obvious reasons in the phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials. So are you recommending to your patients with chronic kidney disease and chronic underlying conditions to still get the vaccine, or are you taking it on a case-by-case basis?
Good question. As far as patients with chronic medical conditions are concerned, they're all eligible and should take it. There is no harm. The question was about ESRD or dialysis patients. We have been giving it to them if they're greater than 65 anyways. So there was a program to have it given to everybody in the dialysis unit, but because of the availability backlog, we were not able to. So hopefully this will be all over. Regarding patients with cancer on chemotherapy or transplant patients who are immunosuppressed, the transplant societies have cleared it a few months ago. So all our transplant patients were told, take it if you were above 65. Below 65, we couldn't give it to them. Now it's opening up. So we have already told all our patients to go get it. Chemotherapy patients, or also oncologists have been asking them to take it without any qualifications. So unless you're terribly sick with some, current infection or something, you should be able to handle it. Like I said, there is no harm in taking it. It may not be effective if you're very heavily immunosuppressed. So you may not be able to mount that immune response, but still, and we've been giving vaccines to our transplant patients. The only qualification is, and if anybody with the transplant is here on this, listening to us, you can't take even attenuated live vaccine of any kind ever in your life. That includes
Right.
the AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson's. You're only allowed to take Moderna or Pfizer. So I want to make sure you're hearing it loud and clear. If you're a transplant patient, you're on medication for transplant, you cannot take any live or attenuated virus. So ask your nephrologist or your transplant doctor before you take any vaccine. But the Moderna and Pfizer, no problem.
And if I could just echo
Sure,
that,
that's great advice.
because if I could just echo that, uh, as I alluded to earlier, you can't get sick from these vaccines. So if you are immunosuppressed for any
Mm-hmm.
reason, um, the only harm that might come to you if you get the vaccine is you might not get the full immunity because your body may not be able to mount as strong of an immune response as somebody who's not immunosuppressed. So therefore, you might not create as many antibodies, or your risk of actually getting COVID-19 after being immunized will be higher than the average person. But you won't get sick from the vaccine itself if you're immunosuppressed or if you have a history of cancer or anything like that. You won't get sick from the vaccine itself if you get the if you are vaccinated. It's just a question of how strong will your immune response be? How much immunity will your body actually be capable of building up? That's the only issue.
What would you say to a patient of yours that would come to you and say, I already had COVID, do I still need to get the vaccination because I probably have antibodies now?
I would say you should still get the vaccine, and here's why. The data that we have suggests that natural immunity from a COVID infection can last maybe 6 months. They don't think that that immunity is lifelong. There are cases in other countries in Europe where people who were infected with COVID-19 previously got sick again a year later. And so, yes, you have some
Mm-hmm.
temporary protection after being infected with COVID-19, but it is not a lifelong immunity. And so, therefore, in order to enhance your antibody response, if you are exposed again in the future, you should absolutely get any one of the vaccines, even if you've already been sick with COVID in the past.
Great. I'm going to start to wrap things up here this evening. I wanted to just end with one last question for Dr. Jukaku. Do we have any data yet from any of the manufacturers, Dr. Jukaku, regarding some of the questions that have come have been regarding if I get the vaccine now, does that then mean like how I have to go in every year to my doctor's office to get a flu shot? Am I gonna have to go in every year and get a COVID vaccination shot? Do we have any data regarding that or any publications regarding that that you've come across?
Not that I have. We have looked at it. I have tried to look for it. I have not seen any publications or any data or any reference. Farhan, do you have anything?
Yeah, so even the immunity from the vaccines, we just don't have enough long-term data yet because the vaccines are so relatively new. We don't know how long the immunity is going to last. It's probably not going to be like your annual flu shot. It's going to be more like that tetanus booster that you have to get. It's probably going to be more in line with that, where every
Mm,
so often, maybe every 3 or 5 or 7 years, you have to go back and get another booster of a COVID-19 vaccine, but it's probably not going to be a yearly endeavor.
great. Well, I guess I want to, Dr. Bhatti and Dr. Chikaku, I would like to once again thank you both for taking time out of your schedules to address the IAGD community. I think it was a very informative 45 minutes. I really appreciate your time. The community appreciates your time. And we just hope that everybody that's been watching this and listening to this has now come to terms with the confidence that they need to go out there and go ahead and get vaccinated. So again, thank you very much. And before we end, I'm going to just invite Mufti Rabbani to just do a closing dua for us, and also just address the community and just give a statement to the community from his perspective about the importance of everybody getting vaccinated. So from my end, Assalamu Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu Alaikum warahmatullah. Wa alaikum assalam. Can you guys hear me? जी बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम अल्हम्दुलिल्लाहि वहदा वस्सलातु वस्सलामु अला मन ला नबिय्य बअदा अम्मा बाद अऊज़ु बिल्लाहि मिनश शैतानिर रजीम फसलू अहला ज़िक्रि इन कुंतुम ला तअलमून. Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala says, ask the experts if you do not know. This is the ayah I gave khutbah like 2 weeks ago on this regarding the same issue about vaccination, how people have doubts, and there are people who wants to basically listen to purely from Sharia perspective, and they want to listen to the word, fatwa, mufti, and Sharia from all words. Like I've been studying this issue of getting vaccinated. I was reading I think I was listening to Dr. Junaed, he just mentioned, like about 80 or 90 years ago, they had like these kind of issues, cholera, smallpox, chickenpox, and some of the other ones, plague and measles. Like those are the things. Even in those days, the muftis of those times, people today, they give their references. They are giants in their field. Like for example, Ashraf Ali Thanvi, Mufti Mahbub Hassan Saab, and Fatawa Darulum Deoband, and there are many other fatawas I was studying. All of them, without any hesitation, they said you can take it and you should take it. Even they mention very clearly, even if it is simply preventative, even if it is only preventative, you should take it. And then after that, at the end, they closed it and saying, taking vaccination, this is not against the tawakkul. This is not against the relying on upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then they quote the hadith in which the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was asked, أرأيت أدوية نتداوى بها ورقا نسترقي بها وتقى نتقيها هل ترد من قدر الله شيئا قال هي من قدر الله. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was asked, do you think that the treatment we use, the ruqya we recite, and what we seek to protect ourselves with will deter us from Allah's decree? He sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied, they, the medication and the means of protection are all from Allah's decree. Imagine this, like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had made it very clear. After that, no one should have any type of doubt taking vaccination, and we should make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala take this pandemic away from us, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us relief, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give shifa those who are affected, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive those who have affected and left this world. And like many loved ones, they have left this world just because of this pandemic. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive them, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them the maqam of the shahada. And closing this, inshallah, I will close right here and make a special dua for, like brother Jukaku, Dr. Jukaku. He lost his elder brother very recently. And Dr. Bhatti, he just lost his uncle, due to same reason. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them maghfirah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them the highest place in Jannat al-Firdaus. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.